Hi, I am Miss Roz. Today we are going to start talking about the yeast unit. So I'm going to talk about some of the basics of yeast and also talk about two of the types of mixing methods. Right. So first off, fermentation. Right. This is when the yeast and the enzymes start to work together and they break down the carbohydrates within all the ingredients, and this is what we call fermentation. And they actually produce two byproducts. Right. So fermentation is the breakdown of the carbohydrates. Right? And we're using the yeast to do this, and the enzymes that are found within the yeast. Right? And they produce two byproducts. One is alcohol, okay? And this is going to be for flavor. Right? However, the second one is going to be carbon dioxide. Right? And if you remember from science class, CO2 is a gas, right? And this is going to be for the leavening agent. Right? So you'll notice that bread tends to have a particular flavor to it, and that's because of the alcohol. Right? You will not get drunk off of your bread because you will be baking it. But then also the carbon dioxide is what helps to rise your bread, right? When we make yeast bread, it takes much longer than what we're used to when we did with the quick mix methods, right? With the quick mix, I was able to mix my ingredients, make a batter, and put it directly in the oven, and it would be done within a half hour, 45 minutes. However, with yeast bread, this is a little different because we need to let this carbon dioxide create more gas, right? And so that means that it's going to actually take closer to an hour to 3 hours to let your product rise before you can shape it and then put it in the oven to bake, right? So just keep that in mind that yeast breads do take a little bit longer, right? When we do make yeast breads, there are some key ingredients that we use to help with the production of our yeast breads. Right? One of the first ones is sugar. Right? So this could be in the form of granulated sugar, brown sugar, honey, maple syrup, agave, whatever it is. But this sugar that we use is helps to feed our yeast. Right? So in order for my yeast to grow and to create that carbon dioxide, I need it to feed it. And so the sugar is what the yeast feeds off of. However, we also have salt, and this is what is going to help control that yeast, right? So as that yeast is growing, feeding off the sugar, right? That salt that you add into into the ingredients is going to help make sure that the yeast doesn't grow out of control, right? And then you have flour and water, and what you remember from when we did quick breads and cookies and all those kinds of things is that flour plus water or any kind of liquid makes gluten. Okay, and so in yeast products, right, we want to develop a lot of gluten. All right, and then what happens is that the gluten tends to help trap that carbon dioxide gas, which helps then leaven your ingredients. Okay, or leaven your bread, I should say. Right, so that's kind of the basics of yeast bread for right now. Right, we're going to talk about two types of mixing methods. Right, we have what we call the conventional method, and then we have the quick mix method. You can make any yeast breads using either method, but there are some kind of advantages to one versus the other. Right, so in my conventional method, right, we are going to first dissolve the yeast that we have into water. Right? And typically this water should be at a temperature of about 105 to 110 degrees. Right? And this is what we call proofing. Right? You are proofing the yeast. Right? The advantage to doing the conventional method is to find out and make sure that your yeast is working. Right? So in this conventional proofing method, I put that yeast into the water and let it grow, and so I know that yeast is actually working, right? So if you have older yeast and you're not sure if it's still good, this is a good way to go, right? But after that, right, I'm going to heat any other kinds of liquids I have, right? So maybe it might be egg, butter, milk, whatever, and then I'm going to add it in with my dissolved yeast, my proofed yeast. Right? And then I'm going to, like I just said, mix it with the yeast. Right? And once that's all together, and then I'm going to, the last thing I need to do is add the flour. Right? And this is going to be based on the recipe. Right? So depending on what your recipe says, it may say to, you might have a soft dough or what we call a stiff dough, meaning it's very hard to work with, or soft dough, which is very, what we call pliable, very flexible, right? So this is the conventional method, right? Which is really the proofing, okay? However, we also have the quick mix method, right? So what you would first do is you would mix all your dry ingredients together. Right, so my dry ingredients may be sugar, flour, salt, yeast. Any of those ingredients would all go into one bowl, right? And then I'm going to heat, right, my liquid ingredients, right? And this time with my heating, I can actually heat it somewhere between 100 and I say somewhere between 115 and 125 degrees, right? You'll notice that in the quick mix method, it is higher than in the conventional method, right? I'm gonna come back to that, and I'll have you kind of think about why do you think in the quick mix method my temperature is higher than if it were in the conventional method, right? So as I'm going over this, you can continue to think about it, and we'll talk a little more about specifically why, right? And then I'm going to add my flour and mix, okay? And then the last thing is just going to be add additional flour if needed, right? Again, based on the recipe. If needed, based on the recipe. Okay. So like I said, when we were doing this, right, in my conventional method, I proof my yeast first. However, in my quick mix method, I don't actually proof my yeast. We will find this out if it works when we let the dough rise, right? So one of the reasons that your ingredient or your liquid is on a lower temperature is because I'm allowing that yeast to be in the water directly, right? There's nothing surrounding that yeast to help protect it, so the temperature needs to be slightly lower. However, if I'm doing the quick mix method, right, because it's mixed in with the flour, the sugar, the salt, and other things, that temperature of 115 to 125 can be slightly higher since your yeast is a little more protected, right? So I'm going to start the demonstration on the recipes, and then we'll come back a little later and talk a little more about kneading